Today, we don't have a script, we don't have slides. It's just sharing some stories, and I'm super excited to be working with the Dream LCA team with Jeff and Chris. We've, as a team, have worked together on and off for at least 15 years, I would say.
Yep,
Originally in the same organization, and thinkstep-anz went its own way. Chris was with Sphera and now is with us in our team. So one team again.
glad to
Um,
be here.
it's
Likewise.
absolutely fantastic to have you here. And we're just going to share some stories, take all your questions, and do come with your questions. You can't get us off script because we don't have one. So feel free to just fire your question through. And we'd like to get to know you a little bit better as well. So we have a poll, and we'd love to hear, are you a practitioner? Have you done your own LCAs? Are you about to commission one? Just curious. Just share a bit about who you are. The majority is just curious. I guess we better keep the stories interesting, Mr. Jeff. By far the most are just curious. So share results. 65% of people here are just curious. There are a few LCA practitioners who can probably relate to some of the stories, and some just had one done. Let's get into it. Combined about 60 years of LCA practitioners. Chris, I think you started off working actually in a company doing LCA work, whereas Jeff and I probably started off at university having our LCAs as part of PhDs, but you've got some real out there experience, Chris. So you've got one above us here. But amongst all of us, I think we had so many different topics. So we'll look forward to that. We also all do know LCA isn't perfect. So we'll probably have a few fun stories to tell as well. And will LCA ever get perfect? That's something we can discuss next week in our webinar with Jim. And I'll kick it off with a question for Jeff. LCAs can be done of anything, right? But what were the most unusual LCA projects or LCA products that you've done LCAs of?
Thanks, Barbara. I think, as you mentioned, we've all been working together a long time. So I want to kind of go back about 13, 14 years. So I started working for a company called PE International that Barbara and Chris were already part of. At that time, it became ThinkStep. I was initially working in London, and then I relocated my role to Australasia. Barbara was in Wellington and Chris was in Boston. And my role became the head of quality assurance for Asia Pacific. And so I got to look over all the projects for our region. And so when I first moved back, it would have been, I think it was late 2013, early 2014. Two of the first projects that I needed to do QA of were a life cycle assessment for condoms in Malaysia and a life cycle assessment for coffins or caskets in New Zealand. And those two projects gave me a real appreciation for cradle to grave in the LCA context. I'd never quite taken it quite so literally, but those two projects gave me a newfound appreciation for it. So maybe two of the more unusual ones. There's been lots of other weird and wonderful ones throughout, but I think kind of goes to show you can do life cycle assessment of absolutely anything. And since then, I've also done trains, smartphones, food, anything, kind of you name it.
The odd building product
The
too.
odd building product as well, yeah.
Chris, how about you? Anything that can top condoms and
I
coffins?
don't think I can top an LCA of condoms, but there were a couple of ones that were maybe a little bit out of the unusual. So, right after I joined, you mentioned I got started in the automotive industry in Germany doing LCAs, and then I became a P International employee and moved to the Boston area. And one of the first projects there was the first ever life cycle assessment of Christmas trees, where it was comparative, and we compared artificial to natural Christmas trees for the American Christmas Tree Association, which is a thing. And that result showed, even though they're made from plastic and they come from China, that if you reuse your artificial Christmas tree at least, I think it was 6 or 7 times, It actually has a lower footprint than the natural one. And subsequent studies kind of confirmed that as well. And then also something that was out of the ordinary for me was a pretty good sized study for the Bank of Canada about comparing paper banknotes to polymer banknotes, which was a change they were going to do at the time. And so we compared those, and there it turned out that because of the higher longevity of the polymer banknotes, they had a lower footprint over the full life cycle compared based on purchasing power, essentially. And I know our colleagues in the UK, they basically redid that study again for the Bank of England. And my suspicion is that that's maybe part of the reason why New Zealand now has polymer banknotes as well. Maybe that's spilled over from the UK somehow. So those were two that I can remember being involved in myself, but then you see LCA studies in literature sometimes where you go, how did that happen? So just from memory, an LCA of a missile guidance system I have seen. Then LCA of tobacco farming is maybe not that unusual, except that use phase health impacts were excluded, which is a choice. And in the US, with the legalization of cannabis, there was an LCA done by a university on the LCA of indoor cannabis cultivation. And that carbon footprint turned out to be crazy high. I compared that to some high carbon materials like carbon fiber or precious metals or something in a LinkedIn post, and I got a lot of comments saying that's not a fair comparison, it's not a functional unit, which is completely true, but just in order of magnitude, I was a little surprised by those results.
I guess the functional unit, if you had cannabis or precious metals, is what brings you joy.
It brings
Or
you the better rush, yeah, if you can measure that.
Cool examples.
All right, then I'm gonna keep us going. Right, one of the things about LCA is that you can challenge conventional wisdom by using actual data. So what was one of the myths that LCA was able to bust in your experience?
I've got a good example there. It's actually quite a few years ago, but renewable energy, wind farms were growing and there was more demand with this, but there still is a lot of backslash from communities. And very often you hear, oh, it takes so much more energy to build a wind farm and so much more carbon to have the steel, to have the concrete foundations with reinforcing steel. You're clearing vegetation, you're helicoptering in the crew to build it. The nacelle comes possibly from Denmark, is shipped down to South Australia. There is a lot going on. And then there is a lot of carbon fiber in the blades. So it clearly must take a lot more energy than the wind farm will recoup in many years. So a company in Australia who were building wind farms, they needed to prove that it actually was reasonable, but they didn't have the number. So we did a full LCA of a wind farm that had been built, taking all of that into account. And maybe someone wants to hazard a guess on how many years it takes to recoup the energy. I'll give you 1-2 minutes to put a number in the chat. 4 years. Someone else? 4 years. 5 years. 200?
Thank you. Thank you for the 200.
Okay, the 200 comes closest if you would take it in days, because it's less than a year. It was, for one wind did it was 6 months and the other one 9 months. And that surprised even the company who commissioned the wind farm. But gave them really good stories to actually go to the communities and go. That study was even peer-reviewed by 3 independent reviewers because we really wanted to have the credibility of the study.
I can maybe share another example, so sort of a different topic. I've done quite a few life cycle assessments of pulp and paper over the years, and we have clients who get a lot of pressure from their customers to put recycled content into things, because there's always an assumption that everything needs to be recycled paper or it needs to be recycled everything, right? And then that's always going to lead to a better outcome. And so through doing that kind of life cycle assessment work, we're able to show that actually recycled content increases the impact of paper products. And that's actually true kind of on average. And the reasons are a little bit surprising, but if you kind of dig into pulp and paper production, you kind of realize that if you're using the craft process, it produces a lot of what's called black liquor, which is a basically source of bioenergy. There's a lot of energy required to dry pulp and paper. And so with a virgin product, you've got this bioenergy which you can burn and then use that to dry the paper. If you're recycling, you tend to be closer to a city, which is the source of your feedstock, or a port, and you don't have the same access to bioenergy because it's not made as part of the process. So to dry the paper, you have to use fossil fuels, and as a result, the carbon footprint and a lot of the other environmental indicators as well are worse for recycled paper. And several years ago, I wrote like a little newspaper article on the topic: is recycled always better than brand new? Just to talk about that, because most of the time recycled content's a good thing, and most of the time it leads to better outcomes. But there's some cases where that's not the case, and that's one particularly surprising one. And this particular company always has to push back, yes, you'd like us to introduce recycled content, and here's the results to show that that's probably not a good idea.
All right, I got two quick examples that perfectly piggyback of your examples. Number one is about electric vehicles compared to ICE vehicles and the break-even mileage, similar to what you did for the wind farm. So I had looked at electric vehicles, hybrids, and combustion engines during my time at Volkswagen a little bit. But then about, now it's almost 10 years ago, I got to work with a US company, an electric vehicle company, on their first carbon footprint. And the challenge there is always data availability of battery manufacturing, right? So in my previous work, I was used to literature values, and the break-even mileages didn't look great. In this study, we had primary data on production, and the way it was set up and the energy recovery and efficiency they built into the process, and then the carbon intensity of the grid they used, that all helped to reduce that footprint quite a lot. So the break-even mileage came down. I believe it was well below 20,000 miles. So basically first owner, if you like. So that was interesting. So primary data is always the best, right? And especially for fast developing technologies, literature data can be outdated by the time it's published, basically, given how long some of those publication cycles are. And the other one is about reusable food packaging, where there was a big study in Europe where they looked at reusable secondary food packaging, which is basically washed and reused and made of plastic, and compare that to cardboard boxes. So that looked really good in Europe. We did the same study for a company in North America, and turned out that because of the larger transportation distances in the US, those results didn't really transfer well. It all depends on the number of facilities and how long you have to transport these around to wash them, disinfect them, reuse them, right? So here the conventional wisdom was reusable is better than non-reusable, but it really depends on how the whole system is set up.
And we've definitely found the same sort of things in studies we've done in Australia and New Zealand as well. Like often that tyranny of distance means that getting stuff back, washing, reusing, doesn't always stack up as well as you hope it's going to.
Yeah.
I've got another question, and this one probably more for Barbara, because I know she's got an example for this one. What was one of the most unexpected benefits of a life cycle assessment that you ever came across?
Yes, I do have an example here, and I was really surprised by that myself. At a conference, one of our clients talked about how useful the LCA was for their modern slavery statement. And I mean, I always thought that LCA was great and you can use it for lots of things, but I didn't think it'd go as far as modern slavery because that's about people. So I've asked the question, how could the LCA help you? And she said that it was the first time that they actually were forced to really have a very detailed map of their supply chain to know where all the materials they needed come from, where all the, it was a livestock grazing company, and where all their fodder came from, And that got them to some places where they knew that human rights are not highest on the priority. And that is only because they really dug deep into the supply chain, which they had to do because of the LCA. So that full supply chain mapping is something that can help in all sorts of areas. It wasn't necessarily the LCA results, but the process that was so useful.
I do have a quick example too, that maybe not the most unexpected, but maybe a little bit out of the usual, and something that I think we would like to see more of. During my time at Sierra, we had HP, Hewlett Packard, develop a printer LCA tool for kind of EPD-like declarations. And they used the LCA results for the corporate carbon accounting as well, because you collect a lot of the same data. And if you already have an LCA for your product, you multiply that by the annual production, and you already have that covered, including scope 3. So that was nice to see.
What sort of were some of the most interesting applications that you have seen of LCAs?
I think one thing that's happened a lot over the last 5 years or so that I think has been a really exciting development is lots of small startups who are using life cycle assessment for their investors. So they're developing a new process technology. It's a new thing. It might be a biorefinery. It might be extracting valuable materials from waste streams. It might be whatever it is. And there might only be 5 people as a little research lab, but their investors expect them to achieve a certain outcome, because part of the benefit of their process or technology is that it's got a significantly lower footprint than the incumbent thing. And they need to prove that. And so I think it's been quite cool to work with these tiny little organizations off the back of drawings, theoretical bench scale stuff or lab scale stuff that they're trying to scale up, pilot plants, and try to kind of quantify, well, what would the benefit of this thing be, if anything, against an incumbent? And so I think that's pretty cool to see, because it's really refreshing to work with small companies who've got a lot to gain from a good outcome, whether it's carbon or water or waste or whatever it happens to be. I think the other thing that's been exciting as well is working on the bigger end of town, where you're working with existing established manufacturers and they're trying to make a big change. So there's been a few we've been working on with over the years where we can get reductions of more than 50% of their total carbon footprint, for example, by changing the way they use their energy, using different energy sources, whatever it happens to be. And by energy, I don't just mean they bought some renewable electricity. I mean changing their thermal energy sources, new chemical processes, other things which are pretty exciting. One of the ones that I've worked on recently, and we actually had a webinar just a few weeks ago with New Zealand Steel, who are part of the BlueScope Steel Group. They're just making now a major process change, which is reducing their plant's emissions by about 50%. And that one change alone leads to a reduction in New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions, total emissions of 1% at the whole country level, because it's such a significant manufacturing plant. And so it's cool to see those kinds of changes coming through, being driven partly by, environmental reasons, why people want to reduce carbon footprint. They want to reduce their footprint overall. So that's quite an exciting set of things to see.
Thank you, Jeff. We have a couple of questions coming in, so we should go to those.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, what would your advice be for someone who has a career change to quality assurance and ended up responsible for an SME office-based consultancy, now need to look at LCA for the 5 offices as they look to transition from carbon neutral to net zero? What do you think I need to know? Where do I start? Well, that could be us. 5 offices, an SME consultancy, office-based. So I might just talk from experience on what we do. We have actually realized net zero for us will be very tricky, because most of our emissions will be scope 3 travel. We do travel now a bit more using electric car, but we still do have to fly. What we are doing is we use refurbished laptops, for example. They all come from a proper company who still gives us a 2-year warranty on them. So they're not like secondhand from somewhere. But if you look at electronics, and Jeff, I think, can vouch for that, a lot of the electronic manufacturers do actually publish their carbon footprint of their devices. And So that's another thing. You could either go refurbished or have a look at the carbon footprint of those laptops. So there would be an option.
Also, if you are office based and you're trying to get an idea, one of the things you can look at is you can start from a spend-based perspective. So you can say, hey, here's where we're spending our money, and you can use that to work out where the emissions are. So we have some spend-based emission factors on our website, which you can use for free, and you could have a bit of a look there, or use someone else's if you wish to, but effectively do a quick calculation to work out where your hotspots are. Because I think with anything, whether it's process-based life cycle assessment or using a more output approach like the spend-based approach, it's good just to understand where your impacts are. What are the hotspots? For us, corporate travel is a big one. For you, it might be something else. And I think that can be a good place to start, just to work out where you can, where the big ticket items are.
Jeff, maybe you could put a link to the factors into the chat.
Oh yeah,
and
sure.
I'll jump to the next question. What would be your advice for environmental professionals, whether currently work in policy planning, certification consultancies, wanting to get into a career in LCA? How did we end up in a career in LCA? For me, it was pure chance. Someone going, we've got a project, we need someone to work on it. Does it sound interesting? And I said, yes. That was the extent of it. Getting into it.
Well, I mean, especially transitioning from policy, that's a very different animal, right? So in LCA, you got to be prepared and probably enjoy working with large spreadsheets and a ton of numbers, and the devil being in the details, and many rounds of feedback and clarification of gaps or errors. So that is something, I mean, you get better with it over the years with experience, obviously, right? But you gotta be up for that, right? And I mean, how do you do that? I think the UNEP Lifecycle Initiative, they have a couple of resources, free resources online, kind of like basics, the LCA basics, which is always a good starting point. And well, we were gonna start offering LCA 101 workshops ourselves. I don't think they've been announced yet, but we're
we are
on.
just about trying to find out where would people be interested in attending, and watch out for the poll at the end. You can have your say.
Okay.
There are a few postgrad type qualifications that you can do as well if you want to upskill. A lot of people who do life cycle assessment have done some kind of postgrad work in life cycle assessment, and the reason is just because it's often not taught at an undergraduate level. It's not something you'd learn any other way, and so there's often whether there's a pathway there. We've got one of our colleagues who's doing a part-time thing over years, just a paper a year to just help her upskill, and so there's options there that you can look at too.
Zoe is asking, do you find that the focus with LCAs is primarily on carbon? How do you balance communication and prioritization of other impacts? Yes, very often the first question is carbon. I found myself once on a fun panel on a debate, and I was assigned the side of carbon as the only thing that is important. Boy, that was hard, because it just isn't. And there are so many other indicators, and the most important thing, I think, is the trade-offs. So whenever you want to say it's environmentally better, you cannot just look at carbon.
And building off of that, because there's a comment there about how do you balance the communication and prioritization with the other impacts. Sometimes we look at which indicators tell you the same thing that carbon tells you. So which indicators are pointing in the same direction as carbon and which aren't. And then that gives you an idea of, you can group things together in some ways and go, okay, well, here's the things that are giving us different information, and it allows you to look at where the trade-offs are.
Yeah, and thinking back to my PhD thesis in ancient 2007 is when I finished that, but half of it was about multi-criteria decision making and decision methods applied to LCA, just because, like, if you look at the EF 3.1 method, is it 3.1?
Yeah, 3.1.
Yes, they have, what is it, 17 indicators? A lot, right? So anything beyond a handful of indicators, if you throw that up in a chart and you have a bunch of trade-offs, people your mind cannot process that rationally. So then you just tend to focus on one or two for your decision. So that's where just mathematical decision support and single scores can actually help, yet they're not allowed under ISO rules for comparative LCAs, which is a shame to me, but because at least you have a method and a calculation that is repeatable and that you can defend and justify to investigate these trade-offs. So, and there is a UNEP Lifecycle Initiative working group under their LCA flagship project, which deals specifically with the weighting part of this, and developed a tool where you can answer a couple of questions and it will direct you to the best suitable method.
We can probably share those links as well later on when we share the recording.
Yeah, I'll dig that up.
Yeah. One other thing that I think can be useful as well, it's getting a lot more attention in the last sort of 10 years or so, is the idea of planetary boundaries and looking at different environmental impacts in relation to planetary boundaries. And that can help to give people perspective, right? That it's not just about carbon, even though that's one important thing.
We did do a study, a comparative one, where we looked at different packaging options. We had 13 indicators, and one solution came out with the best results in 11 of those 13 indicators. So that can also happen. We are almost over time, but there are 2 more questions from our audience. So what do you believe could have been the greatest impact of prior techno-economic analysis on the life cycle assessment of a project designed for the results-based management and monitoring of green bonds? I don't know if I've got all of that, but
that's a mouthful.
Can we use, I'll make it easier. I'll just paraphrase. Sixto, apologies if I'm butchering your question, but can we use LCA for green bonds?
I'm going to have to pass on that because I had no exposure to the green bond market so far. So I don't think I know what I'm talking about if I would respond here.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give a good answer to that one either, to be honest. But we've certainly done, we've tried to use LCA-based and sustainability-based metrics for assessing investments. We've done stuff in the service sector, but yeah, green bonds, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, so on a general level, any kind of green claim should be supported by credible scientific evidence, right? According to most marketing regulations. And LCA is recognized as one, if not the tool to support such claims. And there have been court cases in the past about this as well. And it's still, it held up in court. So I think it's probably the way to go for any kind of claims.
The one thing I could say is that I do know that for green bonds, you have to self-set targets that the bank or the bond provider needs to accept. And an LCA can, of course, be a benchmark for one of those targets. And then you can prove, using the same methodology, have you improved or not. So that would be one way of using them. More and more questions coming. For LCAs, do you include emissions associated with indirect costs and overheads, as 14067 does not include these? I'll do that very quickly. LCA includes the same and no more or less than 14067 because the 14067 methodology is pretty much based on the LCA standards. It just only focuses on one impact category. But the methodology is essentially the same. I'll say that with some confidence because I was involved in writing 14067, the last version of it. Yeah, but generally speaking, it's the same. And those overheads would be an organizational carbon footprint or greenhouse gas inventory, not an LCA. I've missed one question. In case of our renewable energy generation, during my research, I observed trade-off towards land use, water consumption with CCS, and resource consumption with the decrease in carbon footprint. What are your suggestions to reduce these trade-offs? Whoa, that's a big one to finish off with.
Trade-offs between what? Renewable energy generation and CCS?
I think it's more between the land use, water consumption with CCS, and a decrease in carbon footprint. Probably where do you set your priorities? What are the policies you need to follow?
I mean, I guess as a general rule, if you're trading off between a fossil fuel-based system, which is very land efficient, you know, in the sense you're digging something out the ground and burning it, versus doing something that takes space, whether it's solar PV generation, wind farms, whether it's bio-based something where you've got to grow crops. There are trade-offs, right? So there's going to be a trade-off between dig something out of the ground and burn it and contribute to climate change, or take up space on the surface of the earth, you know, and yeah, there's a trade-off there.
I was gonna refer to this. Can you see this? No, you cannot. I'm just reading Hannah Ritchie's most recent book, Clearing the Air, where she tries to respond to some of the doom and gloom around climate change and other environmental issues. And in there, she compared also like land use of fossil fuels versus renewables. And if you factor in all of the land that is used for tailings and stuff in ponds in the mining industry, it's actually not true that renewable energies are much worse than fossil in that regard. So it's just maybe a plug for that very good book.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jeff. I think we'll close it off here. We do have another webinar coming up next week. We can still pick up some questions there. We will have Chris again. We won't have Jeff, but we'll have Jim Farvel, who coined the term LCA, so he might have a few answers for you too. And before we go, I did promise a poll to go, where should we do an LCA 101? If there are locations that are not on here, put them in the chat. And also, if you enjoyed this and want another one of those, let us know. And we can easily jump on a webinar again and answer more questions, share more stories. And with that, I will end the poll. So Auckland, I think, is next on the list, followed by Melbourne, then Sydney. Next week, same time, same place, we have Jim. And I'm looking forward to hearing about the early days through to today. Thanks so much, everyone, for your questions, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Have a wonderful rest of your day, or Mohamed, have a wonderful start to your day. It's really early for you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
We have many more webinar replays on a whole host of sustainability topics. You can check them out on our website and our YouTube channel.